Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's Sinaloa cartel made just under $13 billion in its entire 30 years long operation. This man made $18 billion in a single year running the same business. Most people have never heard his name, seen him, or know where he lives. That is by design. He runs a tea export company. His operation packages, vacuum seals, and ships large quantities of premium tea across the globe. Within days, it arrives in Sydney, suburbs of Tokyo, and nightclubs around the world. Except it's not tea. Disguised as a tea exporter, he supplies very high quality of synthetic substance called methamphetamine and ketamine. Just 1 kilo of this illegal substance, costing less than $1,800 to manufacture, makes him over $500,000. This is the story of a man who made El Chapo look like a clown, and how a single change to his flight ticket brought him and everything he built crumbling down. On December 18, 2017, a cruiser boat named Valcoista left the port of Geraldton out in the open sea to rendezvous with an Asian mothership 300 nautical miles off the coast of Western Australia. One crew member from the Valcoista presented a half-torn banknote to a crew member of the mothership. The person on the mothership also held his hand forward with the other matching half part of the banknote to confirm the correct token identification. If the two pieces didn't match, either there would not have been any trade exchange, or it could have escalated into a much worse situation. But the tokens matched precisely, and 60 bags containing methamphetamine were transferred to Valcoista. Meanwhile, back in Australia, 2 vans are dispatched from Sydney and Adelaide thousands of miles up to Geraldton. After the transfer, the boat headed back to Geraldton and pulled in and docked in the port. In the darkness, the Australian Federal Police and tactical units were hiding, waiting for the right time to intercept. The vans arrived at the port, backed up, and the transfer process began. Within minutes, the units moved in, approached the cartel members, surrounded them, arresting and seizing all the shipment worth billions of dollars. Upon interrogation, the cartel members revealed this operation was part of a well-resourced and sophisticated syndicated groups with international connections. But they had no idea who was the mastermind behind all of this and where he operated from. But somewhere in a classified DEA document next to the words "Most Wanted" sat a single name: T1. Unlike El Chapo Guzman, T1 did not live a life of grand parties, public exposures, and luxuries, something that is expected out of an international drug syndicate overlord. In fact, T1 was so secretive that he didn't even use a phone and dressed in a simple polo t-shirt and trousers and could have walked right past the authorities and they wouldn't have known it. He understood from the start that anonymity would not only yield him more power, it'd make it much harder for his enemies to identify and find him. But staying hidden was not the only reason he successfully built and dominated the international drug empire across the globe. Ironically, it was his arrest in the late 1990s that opened the floodgates of opportunities for the rise of T1. On August 12, 1998, T1 was sitting in a small cafe in Hong Kong having his breakfast. Moments later, the Hong Kong police, overseen by the FBI and the Royal Canadian Police, stormed the cafe and apprehended T1. He had traveled to Hong Kong from mainland China for business purposes. By the end of 1998, T1 was flown to the US to stand trial. Unlike other violent criminals around the world, T1 had a very calm and friendly demeanor. He always appeared to be intelligent, making strategic calculations in his mind. By the time he was being transported to be held in custody, T1 had already made a plan to exit the prison in the most unconventional way. He was arrested on the charges of conspiracy to import massive amounts of heroin into the United States. And under U.S. federal sentencing guidelines for high-volume transnational narcotics importation, a conviction at trial would have carried a maximum penalty of life imprisonment without parole. And T1 was well aware of this fact. So in order to avoid a life sentence, he took the biggest gamble on his life. He pleaded guilty to the charges to avoid a trial at all cost. This move put T1 into a more lenient prison time bracket, and he completely avoided the life sentence by playing perfectly by the rules of the U.S. federal court system. T1 was sentenced to 9 years in a low-security prison in Elkton, Ohio. This prison was less like a prison and more like a college campus with barbed wires and security guards. The cell blocks had no doors and were divided by not more than 4 to 5 feet high cinder block walls, and inmates could easily communicate with each other by just leaning on the wall. And this is where he met a man who was about to change T1's life forever, a Chinese national named Lee Chung-chuk, a seasoned drug dealer who had snuck into the US across the Canadian border to facilitate a major drug deal. But the FBI were ready on the scene and were able to apprehend Lee and his associates. Later, he was sent to Elkton, Ohio to serve his 12-year sentence. Both T1 and Lee got along very well in the prison, discussing the biggest challenges of their operations. What these two men mapped out over the next few years behind prison walls would eventually generate more money than the GDP of entire countries. But the weapon that made their empire completely unstoppable wasn't a drug, a lab, or a shipping route. It was a single business policy so audacious, no cartel in the history of organized crime had ever tried it. T1 was not new to the drug trafficking business. In fact, earlier in his career, in the public eye, he appeared to be an ordinary middle-class immigrant family man living in Toronto, Canada. But after the nightfall, he was operating as a mid-tier member of a huge Chinese drug syndicate called the Big Circle Boys. He formed partnerships with the Italian and Brazzuto crime family, producing gang violence and mutually profiting all the cartels who otherwise were the biggest rivals fighting for the same market share. T1 used Rizzuto's shipping channels to provide the cheapest and purest form of heroin from the Asia's Golden Triangle and increase their profit margins by over 40% in just under 2 years. On the other hand, Lee Chung-chuk had built his own operation in the past. Unlike T1, who was living a dual life and forming corporate alliances with Italian mafias, Lee was managing operations predominantly between US and Canada, building robust distribution networks. During their time in prison, the entire market of illicit substance slowly pivoted toward more synthetic drugs. T1 and Lee gradually started losing their control over the market as a result. So they formed a pact to regain control by pivoting from agricultural dependencies to form the largest synthetic chemical empire in the world. T1 and Lee Chung-chuk were released from Elkton in 2006, just a few months apart. The DEA and the FBI assumed that putting away T1 and Lee for 9 years would break them and they'll emerge as changed men. Instead, the sentencing completely backfired. By placing two of the most brilliant criminal minds under the same low-security roof, they inadvertently built an incredible safe haven for them to engineer the most sophisticated drug syndicate the world would be seeing in the years to come. T1 was deported to Canada and Lee returned to Asia. The moment T1's travel restrictions cleared, he flew straight to Asia. The two men immediately reconnected, picking up exactly where their present-day room blueprints left off. They resumed their work by building a first-ever drug corporate infrastructure. They started with their own gang, the Big Circle Boys, and pitched an alliance treaty to the most powerful and historically hostile Chinese syndicates. By consolidating them into a single vertical monopoly, they achieved an operational scale never before seen in global organized crime. This newly formed syndicate was named the Sam Gore, which was in fact a nickname given to T1, meaning brother number 3 in Cantonese. For everyone else, it was just called the Company. The company started their operation by dismantling and repurposing old equipment to fully pivot into the production of synthetic drugs. They set up industrial-scale mega labs hidden deep within the lawless, war-torn jungles of northern Myanmar. This territory was controlled by powerful, heavily armed militias who provided protection in exchange for reasonable cuts of the profits. Lee Chung-chuk used his logistical expertise to source tons of restricted precursor chemicals from China and Vietnam, shipping them straight into the jungle labs. Unlike historical brick packaging of other substances, T1 and Lee formed a fake tea company, vacuum-sealed and placed their products inside the golden tea packs and started shipping them in large quantities. But none of this, not the labs, not the tea company, nor the shipping networks, was the move that made Sam Gore genuinely untouchable. What T1 did next was so counterintuitive, so against every rule of how a drug operation is supposed to work, that it made every competing syndicate on the planet irrelevant almost overnight. Their offer was simple. If a drug shipment is seized by the police, the local buyers and wholesale distributors would not have to bear any financial loss, and the company will replace the whole shipment with 100% guarantee for free. This policy alone helped the Sam Gore to rise to the very top of the global market within just a few years. But how the company stayed profitable if they were covering all the losses of their buyers? This is how the math worked out. It would cost the company roughly $1,000 to $1,800 to manufacture 1 kilo of high-quality product in the jungle. By the time that exact kilo hit the streets of Sydney or Tokyo, its hyperinflated value soared beyond $298 to over $500,000. Because of this astronomical margin, the math heavily favored the house. If law enforcement intercepted a massive 1-ton shipment, it only cost T1 and Lee $1 million in lost raw materials. However, to fulfill their guarantee, they just had to cook another batch. This seamlessly fit into their 1 out of 10 model, which meant if only 1 ton out of 10-ton shipment made through the borders, with the other 9 tons caught and seized by the authorities, they would still remain profitable. That single ton that touches the grounds of Sydney, Tokyo, Bangkok, or New York would fetch them roughly $298 to $588 million, while the actual cost of production would still remain under $18 million. Even with a staggering 90% failure rate, the company still walked away with $250 million in profits from a single logistical run. These corporate strategies, along with their large monopoly, yielded them an average of $8 to $10 billion annually. This completely made El Chapo Guzman look like just a hyper-violent clown who only made around $3 billion at his peak. In 2017 alone, the Sam Gore syndicate broke all the records, making over $18 billion in a single year. But $18 billion a year creates a problem that no drug empire has ever cleanly solved. You cannot walk into a bank with $1 billion in cash, and even the most sophisticated system has a weak point. T1 was no different. He understood that keeping the money flow intact without letting the authorities know how the company received the money was his biggest hurdle. Unlike conventional methods of driving physical cash across the borders or using risky banking systems, T1 and Lee Chung-chik operated completely outside the Western financial grid and hijacked Chinese casino junket systems to turn their blood money into washed white money without a trace. On a regular basis, T1 and his highly trusted directors would walk into a luxury casino somewhere in Macau or Australia, would play specific games, significantly lowering transactional losses. Then would walk away with millions of dollars not in physical cash, but with clean official casino chips and corporate checks. The sheer genius of this layout was that the millions of dollars they played with at the tables didn't cross any borders. It was capital that had already been mirrored on abstract ledger sheets by underground brokers balancing the street cash collections somewhere in Australia and Japan. As technology evolved, the syndicate upgraded this mirror network by integrating digital assets. By anchoring their logistics to crypto and blockchain, the syndicate could anonymously secure chemical supply chains and settle immense cross-border trade balances in seconds. This way, the Sam Gore syndicate operated completely untraceable by the financial systems and law enforcement, while at the same time becoming one of the largest drug empires in the whole world. But just like any major drug empire, the fate of the Sam Gore syndicate was sealed by a single flight ticket booked by a man in Myanmar. On the morning of November 15, 2016, Sai Sheng-se was walking awkwardly through Yangon International Airport in Myanmar, preparing to board a flight back to Taiwan. He was carrying a small leather bag, casual clothes, and looked incredibly nervous. This behavior caught the eye of an alert airport police officer, and Sai was pulled to the side for a quick search. Upon inspection, they found 2 small plastic bags tightly strapped to his thighs containing 80 grams of ketamine each. While the drug amount was minor, the 2 smartphones inside his pocket were an international counter-narcotics goldmine. Sai wasn't a regular low-level mule. He was a trusted logistical handler for the inner circle. When tech specialists cracked open his phone, they found casual, candid photos and videos of T1 lounging, partying, and traveling. The messaging apps contained encrypted chat logs detailing real-time maritime shipping coordinates, container numbers, and delivery drop-off instructions for multi-billion loads of crystal meth heading to Australia and Japan. The single phone blew the lid off the entire global operation of T1. The Australian Federal Police have been hunting for a decade-long meth operation cartel who were flooding Australia with the dangerous substance but had no clue how and where this operation was running from. The FP, along with 20 global agencies, immediately launched Operation Kungar to track buyers, sellers, transporters, and anyone and everyone associated with the company to bring the cartel down. What followed was the most coordinated anti-narcotics takedown in Asia-Pacific history. 20 agencies, 11 countries, years of intelligence. And T1, the man who had stayed invisible for 3 decades, was about to find out that a single unlogged phone had already told them everything. In 2017, the FP took down 8 key members of the cartel in Western Australia who were trying to smuggle 60 bags of pure meth in Australia on a boat. Then in 2018, global agencies conducted coordinated raids on Sam Gore Labs within the Golden Triangle, disrupting their production capacity. Anti-money laundering units targeted the syndicate's primary laundering pipelines by arresting many high-roller casino junkers who worked for T1 and Lee across Southeast Asia. Then in 2019, a major media exposed T1's real identity with his real name and photos as a suspected multi-billion-dollar overlord. His face was all over the place, and now the world finally knew who T1 really was, who made the El Chapos of the West look like cranky amateurs. By 2020, a large portion of the company's global operation had been affected. But the ultimate whiplash landed when the whole world went into a total lockdown due to the pandemic. Supply chain froze, and choked shipping lanes crippled the company's cash flow. T1 and Lee started to panic. Lee fled to Thailand while T1 was hiding in Taiwan. In October of 2020, the Royal Thai Police tracked Lee Chung-chuk to his luxury house in Bangkok, Thailand, and he was arrested. Due to severe disruption in flight schedules and travel restrictions, T1 tried to book a direct flight to Canada, but he was forced to book a brief layover flight at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport. There was already an international red notice against T1. When his flight landed in Amsterdam, the authorities moved in, and the biggest drug overlord was finally in handcuffs without firing a single shot. A single phone was enough to dismantle a multi-billion-dollar operation. But somewhere in Colombia, a man sitting at the very top of his own empire made a decision that no drug lord in the history had ever made. He didn't run, he didn't fight. He walked straight into a DEA office and handed in something no one had ever done before.